talking about LGBTQ issues, you know, I had people who were Muslims telling me that I'm a kafir, that I'm no longer, I'm now excommunicated from the fold of Islam. I've also been blessed to have been in frontline politics now for almost 15 years.
He was Scotland's first ever Muslim First Minister. Our guest today is the man himself, Mr. Humza Yousaf. Do you think Israel, did they miscalculate the whole idea of TikTok and Instagram and the live feeds?
I think the Israeli government under Benjamin Netanyahu have a very strong propaganda. I think they're very good at pumping out as much propaganda.
Elon Musk.
My favourite, my best friend.
Do you indirectly actually like him, deep down?
My suspicion is that Elon Musk has always been supportive of white supremacy. You know, you live your entire life in the public eye. Your family gets dragged into it. People question your integrity, your character, your faith.
Bro, my dad's been on my case for the last week. I need to send him money in Bangladesh.
So what's stopping you, bro?
Bro, it's long. The queues are endless. And have you seen where they're located? Red routes, nowhere to park. Nah, man.
Why don't you use what I use?
What do you use?
Basically, it's this app that I use. It's called Taptap Send. And bro, it's a game changer. I don't have to go to these money transfer shops. I don't have to wait in the queues and I don't have to get a parking fine. It's all on my phone. And I can use my card to send money back home instantly.
So what's the catch?
There is no catch. In fact, it's quite the opposite. No hidden fees, no transfer fees, and on top, if you use the KSR code, you get £20 credit.
Say no more. £20, yeah? I'm gonna download the app right now. My dad's gonna love me for this.
That's what I'm saying, bro. Problem solved. Now let's get inside. We've got a killer episode to record.
He was Scotland's first ever Muslim First Minister, a historic milestone for representation in the UK politics. Before we begin today's episode, ladies and gentlemen, supporters and well-wishers, please do consider subscribing to our channel on the platform you are tuned into, particularly on YouTube. It is your subscription that motivates me and the team here at Side by Side to continue with our efforts, episodes after episodes. This episode has been sponsored by Taptap Send. Can you sing?
Terribly.
Terribly.
Yeah. I mean, you can give me a song and I'll sing it, but terribly. You know, I've not got a good voice. Do you want me to do some? I don't.
Can
know
you sing one? Like no.
I don't know any Bengali music. You can teach me. I mean, Bangladesh must have a movie industry in the way that Pakistan and India do, right?
Yeah. Of course. Can you sing Tajdar Haram?
I don't know it. I know it, but I don't know the words.
Tajdar Haram. Oh.
Nigah hai karam. But no, I don't know all the words. we can sing together if you want. I like that. So the obviously the original version is amazing, Sabri Brothers, but the version obviously that Atif Aslam did in Coke Studios,
amazing.
Probably put that Qawwali in the minds of the younger people who would never have heard of Qawwali in their life. So actually, he's done a great job with that.
Amazing. Assalamu alaikum, Mr. Humza Yousaf. You like to say as Yousaf.
Humza Yousaf, yeah, whatever you want to call me, feel free. But Yousaf, yeah, of course, after the wonderful, blessed Prophet Joseph.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you for making the time for us. Why don't you give us a bit of a context of who Mr. Yousaf is? Because I wish everyone knew who you are, but I'm sure there will be some who don't know. So for those guys who don't know, who is Humza Yousaf and what's his purpose on this earth?
Very good question to start with. Look, for me, and I'll not refer to myself in the third person. First and foremost, I'm a father of 3 beautiful girls and a husband, of course, to a wonderful wife, Nadia. Those are the first 2 important jobs that I've got before anything else. I've also been blessed to have been in frontline politics now for almost 15 years and had various roles. Probably the one that people know me for is I was formerly the First Minister of Scotland, the first person of colour to ever reach that position, the first Muslim leader actually of a majority non-Muslim Western country, but also been in the Scottish Government in various different roles for about 12 years. I was the Cabinet Minister for Health, I was the Cabinet Minister for Justice, Cabinet Minister for the Minister for Transport, Minister for External Affairs, and been quite vocal politically for, in fact, almost 2 decades overall. So what is the purpose? Well, there is an awfully difficult question to try to answer in one sense, but also terribly easy on the other. If I was to boil it right down, what's the purpose? Look, I believe my purpose on this earth is to do good. I'm very proud to be a Muslim. Don't shy away from my Islamic faith, and my purpose is service. And that can take very many different forms, but that's my purpose: to do good and to serve.
Okay, and give us a rundown on what's happening around the world now, like from a Muslim perspective.
Look, the world, I think, is in one of the most difficult times and turbulent times that I can remember, certainly in my lifetime. And I'm certain post-war, we are riddled with conflict in a way that we haven't been for many, many years. And it may be because social media is now so available that we see that conflict more than we probably saw it before. But it certainly feels like the world is in a very turbulent place. So on the European continent, you've got war, with Russia's aggression in Ukraine. The Middle East, my goodness, you could point to a variety of difficult conflicts that are going on. The genocide in Gaza, the deliberate starvation of 2 million people, the killing of well over 50,000, over 55,000, and that's probably a very conservative number. And then, of course, most recently with the illegal strikes that Israel has conducted on Iran in order to try to even put even more fuel on the fire that is currently engulfing the Middle East. And then there's ones that people don't really talk about, like Sudan, which has seen probably the largest displacement of humans, of people, in any other conflict in recent times. But nobody's really talking about Sudan. And then there's many other ones that don't get any recognition because they're so below the radar. So the world is engulfed in conflict. And that's why we need people, Muslims, non-Muslims, people of no faith and all faiths, to really put their concerted effort in, first of all, how to prevent conflict, but secondly, when it does arise, how do you mediate and broker peace?
How do you prevent conflict if everything is in the hands of Netanyahu and Trump?
Look, I think you've just hit the nail on the head. It's about leadership. So some of what I'm working on and will be working on, because I'm not standing again for election next year to the Scottish Parliament, is how do we ensure that our leaders across the world are rooted in ethical values. It doesn't have to be faith-based. I've got to accept some people are not of faith, and that's obviously their prerogative. So how do you ensure that leadership, faith, non-faith, that people are rooted in ethical values, serving their humanity? We don't want people to just get into power because of populist rhetoric, because if you're a populist, then you'll do whatever you think for that short-term moment is popular that will get you the votes that you need. You'll do whatever's necessary to cling on to power, like Netanyahu is doing in Israel. And that is a very, very dangerous problem. We have leaders who are not rooted in doing what's best for not just their country, but for humanity. They're doing what's best for their political careers.
But where do we all go? I mean, look, the reality is the politicians are funded by donors, and you can trace back the donation, and most likely you will find AIPAC is behind it. So if it's a money matter, why would a politician, be ethical and change his mind on certain views? Because it's really not him who's exerting his views. He is actually a carrier for someone else, for something else.
So you're talking about the American system, obviously.
Even the UK system, wherever
I'll come back to the UK system. So one bigger question is, can you create a better system? So can you create a system where actually political donations are either capped or actually don't exist? Instead of political donations, essentially, you could have a system where, depending on your membership size as a political party or some other metric, actually the state gives you some money to run your election campaign, and that's it. So there's kind of level playing field in that sense. So you can't just raise millions, in the US case, billions to run an election. If you're not going to have some sort of kind of serious regulation around or cap in place, or you could say, look, the maximum a party can raise is X million. So they can't be, so that again, there may not be an exact level playing field, but there'll certainly be limits. If you're not going to do that, then I suppose the question I would ask is, for everybody who complains about AIPAC, and I understand the complaints that people make, AIPAC is lobbying on behalf of a foreign government, influencing the buying influence in the American system. Well, look, there's plenty of wealth that and wealthy people that support, for example, let's take the issue in Gaza and the pro-Palestinian cause. There's plenty of people that support that. Well, why are they not getting together and deciding to use the extensive wealth that they've got? So I would stop complaining about AIPAC, because AIPAC will keep doing what AIPAC have done for decades. Stop complaining about AIPAC and begin to put your own money where your mouth is if you don't agree with what they're doing.
How do we do it?
It's not very sophisticated at all. I mean, the system is already set up, and if we're talking about American politics, the PAC system already exists. The Political Action Committee system already exists. AIPAC is just the American-Israeli PAC. You could easily create a PAL PAC, or if it's Palestine is the issue that's important to you, or you could do it for any other issue that's important to you. There's no shortage, let's just say, about, for example, issues that affect the Muslim community in particular, and Muslims are under the cosh at the moment from the rise of the far right. There's no shortage of extensive wealth within the Muslim community, be it the UK, United States, Middle East, or across the world. The question is, well, who's coordinating it? Who's bringing people together? Who's strategizing and who's mobilizing people? And I don't think that's really being done particularly well.
Let's say we've done that. Now you go to X, Y, and Z politicians, but they are already funded by another lobby. So how do you now bid against each other? I mean, can you even bid against another lobby?
Look, I'm not really going to sit here and advocate for kind of buying political influence. It's not something that I'm a big fan of. What I would say is, when it comes to politicians, let's take the United Kingdom, where we're obviously having this interview. My suggestion to people is, most politicians, and they may disagree with this, but I'm telling you from my experience, that most politicians will want to try to serve the communities that they represent. And the Muslim community now is not just in Bradford or Leeds or Manchester. We're all over the country. So I think we've got to begin to get ourselves involved in politics. So we can either lobby from the outside if we want, and that's fine. People have every right to do that. But actually, the strongest advice I'd say is get yourself involved. It's advice my father gave me. Look, I was, in my teens, complaining about a news report that was, in my view, very critical unfairly of Muslims. And my dad just said to me, instead of moaning at the television constantly, why don't you do something about it? I said to him, fine, I'm going to do something about it. And I joined the SNP. And, the rest, as they say, is history. So, look, you can choose to kind of lobby, use your money, use your wealth, use your talents to lobby, and there's an important job to do there. Or you can actually just get involved and influence to change yourself.
Question for my Instagram followers. What is the deal with LGBT, trans rights, gender self-ID push, and how do you balance that with your faith?
Look, I think actually it's pretty easy. People make it more complicated than it is, I think. Nobody's telling you that you have to change your scripture or your faith. Look, what your faith says is what your faith says, and what your scripture says is what your scripture says, and you can be upfront and you don't need to shy away from that. I think maybe where the complexity comes in is, as minorities, I think you can't choose to say that my minority rights matter and your minority rights don't matter. So saying, look, I as a Muslim should have my rights protected as a Muslim. I should be able to pray the way I like. I should be able to slaughter the meat the way I like. I should be able to practice the rituals of my faith and be protected. But see you as a gay person, well, your rights, not so much. To love who you want or practice your lifestyle the way you want, I'm sorry, I just don't accept that. Well, that to me is when you begin to pick and choose your rights, well, I'm afraid, trust me, if they're going to go for one minority's rights, you'll be the next minority whose rights they'll go for. So I think, and I take the view that if you're a minority and you believe in minority rights and protecting minority rights, then you should, for people who are disabled, for, yes, the LGBTQ community, yes, for people of faith, for people of colour. These are important rights to protect. And, when it comes to your issues around faith, look, faith and politics can be tricky. Look, today we're talking at a day when the English Parliament, the UK Parliament, is debating assisted dying. We had this debate a few weeks ago in the Scottish Parliament as well. And you can make decisions based on your faith. And I voted against assisted dying. You can make decisions and be upfront about that. So I don't think there's necessarily, it can be challenging at some points, but I think we've got to think about from our perspective, do we want our rights protected, and do we believe that our rights exist in a vacuum? My belief is that my rights don't exist in a vacuum. Either everybody has the right to live the life that they want to live in this country as a minority, or I'm afraid we all don't, and that's not a good position.
I mean, look, being a Muslim, we completely surrender our will to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or God. And we can't pick and choose, like, what we take and what we don't take. So what's happening with the LGBT, issue, it's not a case of disability, or it's not a case of, women's rights or empowerment. You can't categorize those, with LGBT and trans and gender self-ID. So how do you separate the two? Because on one hand, you've surrendered your will to Allah, and on the other hand, you're not only just pushing, but you're also going as far as, challenging in court.
Well, look, let me be really blunt with you, and forgive the bluntness, but I don't owe you anything in terms of my spirituality. My connection with God is my connection. I'm not answerable to you, nor am I answerable to your Instagram followers.
No.
Right? No, but so I'm just making that point that, you've got every right to ask the question, but nobody should ever assume, be it of me or Sadiq Khan or Narsha or Barnes Warsi, all the Muslims that are involved in politics, and I see this all the time. Oh, this person is, Sadiq led the Pride March. He's a kuffar. Listen, shut up, right? Sadiq's relationship with God is Sadiq's issue and personal issue, right? For a guy who goes to Hajj, and I've been to Hajj with Sadiq actually many years ago. We're in the same group. Somebody who prays, I know as Sadiq does 5 times a day, talks openly about it. His relationship with God is his issue and his problem that he's answerable for, and the same counts for me too. But what we've got is this thing in the Muslim community that, we've got to somehow be answerable to everybody else for our own spirituality. It's not the case. In terms of gender self-ID, again, let me make the point, and I've said this publicly, I don't think the SNP handled the issue very well. It clearly didn't handle it well. Given the court judgments and everything else that have come. As a result of that, we've got to put our hands up and say, look, the issue wasn't handled well. I go back to this point though. I want people to be able to be protected from hatred, for example. I'll give you the example. When I was Justice Minister, I took through the hate crime bill, controversial at the time. But it gave the rights to people of faith not to have religious hatred stirred up against them. It also gave rights to the LGBT community to make sure that homophobia, transphobia was not stirred up against them. I was never going to look at that bill and say, the Islamic faith has this view on LGBTQ lifestyle, therefore, I'm going to take that. No, of course not. And anybody who thinks I would do that isn't a serious person, in my view, regardless of what any faith or scripture says. I believe in protecting people's rights. And I can't pick and choose as a minority whose rights I have. I have my rights, but you know what? You shouldn't have your rights. That's just, to me, not a logical position.
Okay. I mean, you're right. You're not answerable to anyone apart from God. But people who are backing you and supporting you might think, this is not really what I supported him for.
Don't support me, don't follow me. I really couldn't care less. Genuinely. I mean, I'm not here for validation for people's following or support or like or not liking. I'll speak my truth in the way that I see it. By the way, I'll make plenty of mistakes. Show me a human being who goes through the course of their life and hasn't made a mistake and maybe hasn't had to repent for that mistake or had to atone for that mistake. I'll make plenty of mistakes. The difference with politicians is we live our lives in the public eye. And so we'll get a level of public criticism that most other people won't get. But really, I don't really mind or care whether people choose to follow me or support me. Alhamdulillah, by the grace of God, I've been given enough strength to speak the truth as I see it. If I always did what people expected of me, or what people thought would give me the quieter or easier life, I would not have been the first European leader to call for a ceasefire in Gaza, as I did. Every other European leader was even afraid to say the word ceasefire. I don't know if you ever saw that clip of Justin Trudeau. He accidentally said the word ceasefire and quickly went back on saying, I didn't mean to say ceasefire, I meant to say, and he kind of fumbled his words. So leaders weren't even saying the word ceasefire. But I was the first European leader, against, by the way, what some of my advisors were telling me. Some of my own advisors, my own party advisors were saying, I don't think you should stick your neck out on this issue.
Okay.
But so the point is, you should have the strength of what you're doing, the conviction of what you're doing, be able to articulate it regardless of whether people follow or don't follow by.
But what's your personal view on the whole LGBT?
Not going. I'm done with the questions. You've kind of questioned me on it. We'll move on to the next one because you've already asked me the questions. You've pushed me on the issue. I'm telling you that I'm not answerable to you or anybody else. People know where I exist on right, so I'm happy to go to...
So I'm not allowed to ask that question?
No, you can ask the question. I'm just not going to give you the answer because I've already answered your questions about everything else on this issue. You've asked about it. What I've said is there on a matter of public record. My voting record is there on a matter of public record. My speaking record on this is on a public record. If you want to just make this entire interview, which we've got limited time on one issue.
A few more
well,
questions.
Let's get on to the few more questions because I think it's much better to get on to the few more questions.
No, I was just
your 5 or 6 questions and an obsession on one point. And this is the problem with our community is that sometimes there's a bit of an obsession.
It came as a result of what you were saying about your father. He said like you were complaining on TV and you didn't like certain things, and then your father said go and do something about it.
Sure.
So I thought that's a good time to put the question in.
No. Look, I'm happy with the questions you've asked, and hopefully I've given you a pretty kind of robust and strong answer. And what my position is, and people can agree with it, people can disagree with it. It's absolutely their prerogative to do so. And
you're not going to stand as a politician in the very near future?
No, I'm done. The Scottish elections are in 2026, in May 26, and I've already announced last year that I won't be standing again. So alhamdulillah. By that point, I've done 15 years, done a lot of the top jobs, including obviously former First Minister. But I think my time is right to...
Why not?
I think, look, having done 15 years is a fairly good chunk of time. I'll just be 41 at the time of the next election, so it's a good kind of age, I think, to move on to what the next big challenge is. To be honest, politics takes a lot of it out of you publicly. You live your entire life in the public eye. Your family gets dragged into it. People question your integrity, your character, your faith. You get battered and bruised. And actually a bit of time out to recharge oneself, but also begin to work on other exciting projects, I think is really, for me, really excites me. But also, look, I'm really keen for another generation to come through. I'm not saying I'm old and done, but I definitely would love another generation to come through. And I've always believed as a person of colour who's been in high office, my job is to try to bring other cohorts and other minorities, not just racial and religious minorities, but other minorities across the board through to politics in the front line. Now, that's never going to happen if those who have been in politics for 2 decades in one way, shape or form, as I have, just keep holding on to our seats.
You mentioned a few times, I'm a person of color. Why do you say you're a person of color? Like, what's color got to do with you as a person, your intelligence, your creativity? No,
I don't think we should shy away from who we are. I mean, I'm very proud to be a person of color. Very proud to be somebody who's Scottish Pakistani, and part of that is the color of skin that I have. I'm not one of these people who thinks, oh, you've got to shy away from that, you've got to pretend that difference doesn't exist. No, let's celebrate our differences. We do have differences. We're a country and a nation of black people, brown people, white people. Let's celebrate the fact that all of these people, that's one thing. The second thing, which is the obvious point, is also that I'm afraid if you do have the colour of skin that you and I do, like it or not, we face different barriers to people that are white in this country. Of course we do. Institutional racism, structural racism exists. And so getting into most fields at a senior position, politics, business, health service, academia, if you're a person of colour, and my goodness, if you're a woman of colour, you've got more and more barriers to have to climb than somebody who's, for example, a white male.
So is it not better to just not recognize this whole narrative of
Why be ignorant and blind to the obvious?
Because if you look at Middle East, if you go to other countries, there's we're all of color. So it feels like I'm here in this country. Yes, I know
what
I'm a person of
what
color.
What do you mean everybody in the Middle East is
Like
of color?
they don't say I'm a person of color over there. Like why do we have to say here I'm a person of color?
Look,
Like a white person wouldn't say I'm a person of white color, and this is why it's such a great thing.
No, I think you're wrong actually. Like you've travelled extensively to the Middle East, and I have as well. But in every country, in every region, there'll be structural barriers. It's very well documented and researched in the United Kingdom, of course, that those structural barriers exist. There's been some fantastic books written on it, some fantastic academic studies written about the structural barriers that exist, both in terms of race, but also in terms of religion and others, women, ability, disability, and so on and so forth as well. And I think it's important to recognise it, because if you don't recognise it, you don't acknowledge it. If you don't acknowledge it, you don't do anything about it. If you don't do anything about it, then those structural barriers just deepen and they don't dismantle. And our job has to be, as policymakers, as legislators, to try to dismantle as many barriers as possible, so as many people have as equal opportunity as possible.
See, that's where I would probably differ. Like, I wouldn't recognize myself as a BAME. Mm-hmm. I'm a human being. I'm as human being as John, and there is no reason why I shouldn't be equal.
Listen, wonderful that you don't recognize it, and let's suggest that you think of yourself as looking at the world colorblind. When you walk out of this room, what do you think is the first thing that people see about you?
They see a man walking down.
Okay, maybe a man. What else do they
wearing a suit?
And what do you think the second thing they see is? If you think, by the way, the fact that
I think they will look at my beard.
Okay, you think so, and you don't think that one of the things that they'll see, because you're obviously trying to avoid answering the question truthfully here, because the truthful answer is
they'll look at my color. Okay, fine.
They'll see you as a brown man.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll immediately make judgments. And by the way, your beard's a good point. They'll probably identify you as a Muslim man, given your beard. Not everybody who's brown with a beard is a Muslim, of course. You can ask any Sikh that question. But they'll probably make an assumption that you're Muslim. And then they'll probably begin to make some assumptions about the way you think and the way you act, the way you treat women, the rituals with which you kill animals in terms of the food you eat, and so on and so forth. And so you can be as colorblind as you want to be, but I'm afraid the world ain't colorblind. And you can kid yourself, you can fool yourself, you can believe something that is not the truth. Whether you recognize it or not, I'm afraid, with the greatest of respect, is completely irrelevant, because the fact is the world isn't colorblind. And
but why does it matter? Why does it matter?
Well,
what
very,
X,
very
Y, and
simply,
Z person thinks of my color, and
very
what the
very
assumptions
simply,
that they make? Like, why does it really
let me
even matter?
just give you one very simple example that studies show, of course, that if you have a certain name, Kazi Rahman, and put it on a CV, in many companies, your chances of getting that job versus somebody who puts in a CV with the name John Smith, who do you think is more likely to get the job? Even if you're both qualified. In fact, even if you're overqualified, what do the studies, do you think, tell you who's more likely to get the job?
That's a difficult one, because the tide is turning, times are changing, and
where's your empirical evidence for that?
Because we have many, even people like yourself in high positions, and you've done it.
So you've got one or two people who've managed to break through a glass
Sadiq Khan is another example.
But I'm asking you, where's the empirical evidence?
Sadiq Khan is...
No, you made a very strong statement to say times have changed.
Yeah.
Right, so you're saying that that problem doesn't exist anymore, that people don't have to put in...
I'm not saying it doesn't exist.
Okay.
People
so where's the empirical evidence that times have changed? Just because one or two people have managed to break through a glass ceiling. By the way, Sadiq Khan and I and people like us generally tend to be the exception to the rule. We manage to get to positions. Not everybody, I'm afraid, gets the opportunities that we get. And most of us from the South Asian community, most politicians in Scotland, in fact, all members of Parliament in Scotland who are not white are from the South Asian community. No black, no Jewish, no Arab members of the Scottish Parliament. So look, your original question was, why does it matter? It matters because whether you recognise it or not, structural racism and structural barriers exist, regardless of whether Kazi Rahman or anybody else recognises it or doesn't recognise it. Now, you can either acknowledge it and try to defeat it and dismantle the obstacle, or you can live in wonderful, blissful ignorance. And by the way, it will just keep impacting you and hitting against you and people like you. And that's the problem. So you can either go, look, I've not been affected. I could say that. I could say, look, I'm Humza Yousaf. Alhamdulillah, I managed to become First Minister of Scotland at one point. government minister for 12 years. Hey, it didn't affect me, so it must be okay for everybody else. But of course, all of the evidence tells me otherwise. So we can either be kind of individualistic about it, or we can look at society as a whole and say, there's a problem, and it's our duty collectively to try to fix it.
Did you become a first minister based on merits or because of the party itself and their power and their popularity, or you were just a tick box, diversity tick box?
No.
What was it?
No, look, I don't think diversity tick box would be the answer, because ultimately, actually, the party was able to choose between me or a female leader, and both would have been strong in terms of what the party was trying to communicate or say. But it's, I suppose, also making the obvious point at a time when Islamophobia is on the rise. Having a Muslim leader might not make you the most popular political party in the world. But despite that, look, the party obviously elected me as the first minister at the time, the leader of the party at the time. For me, there's something I was really proud about, because, as I say, Islamophobia is on the rise, has been for quite a number of years now. The rise of the far right is driven by anti-Muslim hatred in the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Netherlands, Austria, all driven by anti-Muslim hatred predominantly. And yet, in Scotland, and in fairness in London, the people of those countries, and in London's case, city, have chosen as their main representative that they actually don't care the fact that that person's Muslim, but they want that person to represent them because they're seen as the most competent, or the person with the most merit, and whose ideas they can value. And my period was a lot shorter than Sadiq Khan's as mayor, and I wish him continued success as mayor of London. But I think that points to the fact that there's many more good people out there than there are people that hate Muslims and hate minorities.
So if I run, I mean, obviously Labour has to accept. That means if I run for Sadiq Khan's position, I should win as well, because is it him that's the leader that's really winning the votes, or is it Labour that's winning the votes?
Oh, that's a good question. It's a really good question. So look, in any election, there will be a combination of both. So a mayoral election is usually about the personality. Of course, there's a big following for a party. And if the party is on the rise, now Sadiq Khan could well be damaged because of decisions that are made by Keir Starmer. And that's not on Sadiq's shoulders, that's on Keir Starmer's shoulders. But there's no doubt that that can affect. But I think in a race kind of for a mayor type position, even as First Minister, so in Scotland, or Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, personalities can play a big part. There's no doubt about it. Our politics probably become more about personalities. But also, look, parties as well. And if you want to think about the personality issue for a minute, is probably the reason why Reform are increasing in popularity. I don't think many people could name a single Reform policy. I mean, they might say, something about immigrants, but they probably can't really name, you said, what's Reform's top 5 policies? Most people that support them couldn't tell you their top 5 policies. But they like Nigel Farage for whatever reason, and we probably have to understand the reason properly. But they probably support more the individual than they do political parties. So look, I think your question is a very good one. There's definitely a mix of the two, but I think we're probably reading more towards personality politics and slightly less away from party politics.
Interesting. Your coalition partners, was that a miscalculation or betrayal?
That's a really good question. So I would say right idea, poor execution. Right. So I think my decision to end the deal with the Greens was the right one, because there was just too much tension in that partnership and that relationship. They were going to end the deal anyway, likely, because they put it to their members as well. That would have been difficult for us. And I was getting some internal pressure from my own party, including from very reasonable people, not the kind of people that didn't support my leadership anyway, but the kind of reasonable people that had backed me and saying, look, I think it's time. Poor execution though, because I rushed it and hadn't thought through fully all of the kind of moves ahead that we'd have to figure out and calculate. But also the way in which I did it then piled on an increased resentment from the Greens towards, me as an individual and us as a party. So look, right decision, because now the current First Minister, John Swinney, leader of the party, is benefiting from that decision. He's free, he's unencumbered by the Green Deal. But yeah, poor execution, I would say. So it's a good lesson learned.
Hey guys, I hope you have been enjoying today's episode of Side by Side with myself as your host, Kazi Shafiqur Rahman, and our VIP guest, Mr. Humza Yousaf. If you have been enjoying any contents on Side by Side platforms, please do consider subscribing to our channel on the platform you are tuned into. It is your subscription that motivates me and the team here at Side by Side to continue with our efforts episode after episode. And with that said, let's get straight back into the show. It seems like every decision you made, whether it's LGBT, whether it's breaking out from coalition partners, whatever you did, there was no pleasing. Because I've tried to look up everything, all the Wikipedia references and whatnot. It's like no matter which way you turned, it seemed like there was something. There was a surprise for you. Oh, actually, no, you can't go this way. Oh, you haven't informed us of this. Oh, this is not our policy. It seemed like you were in a box and you couldn't maneuver in any direction.
Look, politics is always going to be riddled with complex challenges. And so you could either just do all the easy stuff, or you can do things that are really controversial. Hate crime bill is a classic example, right? There's a bill which I was very passionate about. And by the way, all of the things that people said that would happen when the hate crime bill was passed, they said the sky would fall in, the earth would swallow us up, police would come knocking at your door every time somebody told a joke, all this kind of stuff. None of that has happened. Unsurprisingly, none of that has happened. So politics is about making some really difficult decisions. And yeah, you're right, I've had some really difficult roles. I was Transport Minister. We had the Beast from the East storm. I was the Justice Secretary who took through probably one of the Parliament's most controversial pieces of legislation. I was Health Secretary in the midst of a global pandemic. I was First Minister when my own in-laws were trapped in Gaza for 4 weeks. So yeah, but you've got to accept that if you want an easy life. Look, there was a famous quote that often says, look, if you don't want to be criticised, then just say nothing, do nothing, be nothing. And you can either choose to live your life that way or you can try to make a difference.
What if you could focus on improving people's life, quality of life in Scotland?
Well, we did. That's why we've got, for example, we managed to lift many thousands of children out of poverty in comparison to the poverty levels increasing in England. It's why, for example, we have groundbreaking policies that you don't have here in England. Prescriptions are free in Scotland. Higher education to universities, to some of the best universities in the country, St Andrews, Glasgow, Edinburgh, Aberdeen, Dundee, all these universities, access is free. We've managed to do groundbreaking initiatives. We've managed to improve people's lives in a countless number of ways. But I'm afraid until Scotland's independent, which obviously it's not, decisions that are made by the government in London are still going to impact us. You can't have 14 years of Tory austerity and now almost a year of Labour austerity and not think it's going to impact the decisions that we make here in Scotland. So look, I would reject any charge that says, look, all you've ever done is focused on identity politics. You've mentioned kind of LGBT, trans rights, hate crime bill. These are all issues that of course are of importance. But the notional suggestion that that's all we focused on and we didn't focus on improving people's lives, I'm afraid I would reject it and the evidence doesn't bear it out. But if people's lives were genuinely getting worse, why on earth has the SNP been in power for almost 2 decades? We've not won 1 term, we've not won 2 terms, we've not won 3 terms, we've won 4 terms, and there's a possibility we'll win a 5th term in the elections next year. People aren't stupid. If their life chances were abysmal because of the SNP, they would kick us out of office at the first opportunity.
When were you in power? I need to find out when that pothole happened when I went to Glasgow.
What year was it?
It was probably about 3 years ago.
Oh yeah,
you owe me a tyre.
I'm probably health secretary if it was 3 years ago.
Oh dear.
But if it was 3 years ago, I'm sorry about that.
No, they eventually
I'll take it up with Glasgow City Council.
They did not.
You sure you weren't driving too fast though?
No. I was just doing this bend under. I was doing a right turn underneath this bridge. I don't know what it was, and then bang, pothole, and the whole tyre blew.
I owe you to Glasgow City Council for that one.
So if there was a P&L on Humza Yousaf in terms of your achievements versus losses, how would you categorize them? How many wins and how many losses?
I'll let other people do the balance sheet. I would say that I'm really proud of the success that God has granted me over the years. But I don't go around chasing kind of immortality or legacy projects and my own status. I believe that you do good, and when it's your time to move on, there's more good that you continue to do. But the best legacy I can leave when I die is for my children to say he was a great father, for my wife to say he was a really good husband, my community to say we were proud of what he did and that he worked in the service of other people.
Yes, you did. You tried. But what were some of the notable outcomes? One of them is, obviously, you mentioned about poverty. If you were to talk about your mistakes, can you name them, and what did they teach you, those mistakes?
Look, I'll not go through. I mean, for a comprehensive list of mistakes I've made, feel free to go to my opponents. I mean, I'm sure.
No, talk about the main ones that you recognize, the ones that you recognize as being a mistake.
I suppose my point on this is you can choose to live a life where you either regret the things that you did wrong, but we all do things, we make mistakes. And of course, when I've been in politics for as long as I have, never shy away from the mistakes that I've made. Or you can kind of reflect on the fact that you can be really eternally grateful for the opportunities that you're given, and I'm really grateful for those opportunities. I think what you do with mistakes is that you own them, but you don't let them define you. Because whether you're an entrepreneur like you, whether you're a politician who's, alhamdulillah, has some success in high office like me, you're somebody who's working their way through the health service as a doctor, nurse, an academic at university, whatever you're doing, throughout the course of your professional career, but also, frankly, through the course of your personal life, you're going to make mistakes. And as I say, you can either allow those mistakes to own you and define you, or you can own them. And that's where I've said, and I've gone to Parliament, for example, sometimes, and I've made apologies. So the health service, when it wasn't performing as strongly as I wanted it to be performing, and the people of Scotland expected it to be performing, I went to Parliament and I've made that apology to people that were waiting too long on waiting lists, that were waiting too long for accident and emergency care, for example. I've never shied away from saying, well, and I think that's the best thing you can do is be open and honest about, we're not on top of this in the way that we should. Here's the plan. Here's how we're going to execute it, and then judge us on the performance thereafter.
How do you improve something like a health service? And especially when it's intertwined with politics, and perhaps there might be some people who are working against you. Now, on one hand, you're trying to improve the service, and on the other hand, you've got people working perhaps against you. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. But it seemed like on the newspaper or articles, it seemed like there was a big opposition to you as a person.
Yeah, look, politics can get very personal and very nasty that way. And that's one of the reasons why, to be frank, I'm quite pleased to be leaving it, because your integrity and your character is something that I think shouldn't be attacked in the way that your character is. And look, you kind of spent a portion of time at the beginning of this interview talking about LGBTQ issues. I had people who were Muslims telling me that I'm a kafir, that I'm no longer... I'm now excommunicated from the fold of Islam. So you've got people that literally question your essence of who you are as an individual. And then you've got your political opponents who call you all sorts of, names and insults. And by the way, look, I've been guilty of it too, of course. I'm not going to pretend I've not been guilty of personalising my politics at times. I try to avoid it, but I'm sure I've fallen into that trap too. So that is definitely, you're right to pick up. That's a hard, difficult, and a lot of young people who want to get into politics say to me, I'm worried about that element. To answer your question about the health service, look, we could do hours and hours of a podcast on it just in the health service. I think the challenge is we've got a working age, an older aging population. We've got a demographic time bomb. We have low birth rates and decreasing birth rates. And all of that means that we're going to have elderly people who need taken care of, and we're not going to have the workforce to take care of them. And we've already got huge demand on our acute sites like hospitals. And this is true in London as it is in Glasgow and Edinburgh. Really huge pressure. So a few things have to be done. First is the preventative. We've got to try to prevent disease. Now, I know you're big into your fitness because I follow you on social media, so you're big into your gym and fitness journey. We've got to get people fit, active, healthy. I include myself in that. I've got to get fit, active, healthy too. So we've got to try to prevent as much as we can in terms of disease. And that also means things like, I know it's not popular, but that's why you need clean air. That's why you need low emission zones, because, you've got to prevent lung disease. You've got to prevent COPD. And so on and so forth as well. So you've got to prevent where people do get ill, because inevitably, unfortunately, they will. We've got to have the facilities to treat them at home or as close to home as possible. We've then got to leave hospital for those that only need it. And we've got to use technology, including AI, but we've got to use technology in order to try to be as efficient as possible in the health service. And then in the back door, you've got to make sure you've got a really, and this also helps the front door actually, you've got to have a really well-staffed, well-run, consistent across the board social care service that takes care of those that need it, in order to prevent bed blocking or delayed discharge, as it's more appropriately called, and also to help stop the blockage at the front door.
I mean, these are all good, wanting certain things, but how do you actually get it done? Because one thing, if you're a company and you're the CEO and all your team members are on board with you, but in politics it's not the same. It's
That's a good question,
because it really is politics.
That's
really
a great question.
is.
Honestly, it's a really good question. You're right, politics gets in the way of that kind of transformative, sometimes, reform that's required. And again, I'm sure I've been guilty of that over the years too. I think to answer your question, I'll give you one example. When I was Justice Secretary, and as things stand in Scotland now, our prison population is far too high. We have one of the highest, if not the highest, prison population per head of the population in Western Europe. And I was trying to look at other international examples of where they've managed to lower their prison population. And one country where they took it from one of the highest to one of the lowest in Europe is Finland. So I met with the Justice Secretary, former Justice Secretary actually, I think it was, of Finland. And I said, how did you do it? And he said to me, there's a big, long conversation, but the essence of it, he said, was, firstly, we built a political consensus. So it didn't matter if you were in the Socialist Party or the Conservative Party or Centrist Party, whichever political party, we decided this prison population is too high. It's got very negative effects on our society as a whole, and therefore whoever gets in will give each other a kick on every single other issue. But in this issue, let's agree to a 10, 15, 20-year plan plus, that our goal is to dramatically reduce the prison population, which means investment in community service, investment in prevention of crime, etc., etc. So what we're missing, to answer your question, because it's a very good question and a very acute observation, is how do we build the political consensus that the NHS, and the way it's run, that we have to transform it. And we can have a difference of opinion on how that transformation looks, but how do we come to a political consensus? This is the vision that we're going to drive forward. Easier said than done. Of course it is. Election time, political parties will kick lumps out of each other for all sorts of issues. And the NHS, unfortunately, becomes a political football. So it's easier said than done. So it's not an easy issue. Otherwise, it would have been dealt with, I think, probably a long time ago. So I think your question is a good one. But I suppose maybe we need people who are outside of politics, people that are respected across the political parties. Can they play some role in coming together to say this is a transformation the NHS needs and we need to all get behind it?
Yeah, you're right. NHS is like a tool that's used to manipulate and sway people's opinions. Oh, we're going to do this for NHS because it's directly linked to our health.
It gets weaponized, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
It gets weaponized, I think, by politicians. And again, I'm not saying we've not been guilty of that over the years, but it becomes weaponized. And I think maybe a kind of council of elder statesmen and stateswomen from across the political parties sharing that vision and dragging their parties collectively together might be part of the solution, but I'm afraid there's not an easy one to it.
You mentioned low birth rate and at the same time overpopulation, or how does that make sense? How does that work?
No, I said aging population.
Aging population.
Yeah, not overpopulation, no. So in Europe, we're suffering from an aging population and lowering birth rates across most of Western Europe, if not all of Western Europe. And at the same time, the far right in particular, but other political parties want to bring up the drawbridge on immigration. And by a number of estimates, by 2050, Europe will be shy of 45 million workers. And as I say, with an aging population and declining birth rate, they're not going to come from the European Union.
What do you think is a contributing factor for low birth rate? What is contributing?
In truth, I can't answer that question because I've not studied it in great detail, and I don't tend to answer questions I don't know the detail on. I mean, I could take some guesses in terms of why that might be the case, and it may be linked to people feeling that it's too expensive because the cost of living, we're still in that cost of living crisis. So is that a factor that plays into people's minds? Possible. But look, I'm sure there's empirical studies and we should study them and look at them in detail. But the declining birth rate is a problem, is a challenge. But if you've got that combined with an aging population and you want to cut off migration, your economy is going to not just suffer, it's probably going to collapse.
I mean, look, I'm from Bangladesh and from village, and most of our people are poor. And I'm just giving you a small example.
Yeah.
Cost of living isn't a concern to them. They still have so many babies. We might need to use calculators to calculate how many babies or how many children who has.
Yeah.
So don't you think this whole gender issue is a contributing factor as well?
No. I mean, again, unless you're going to present some empirical evidence.
Like, for example, a man and a woman, they make babies, right?
Yeah, but look, again, it's a fatuous argument. I mean, gay people can adopt children, whether you
For where from? They have to come from somewhere,
whether you agree with it or not. That's the reality on the ground. So again, look, unless you're going to present empirical evidence, that's why I said to you, look, I don't answer questions unless I have the evidence in front of me, right? I don't know the answer.
Okay.
Now, what you're doing is saying, I think this is the case. Well, okay, present to me the evidence and let's have a discussion about it. Whatever the reason is, we've got low birth rates, we've got an aging population. Many political parties, including the current UK government, want to seriously restrict immigration. That's going to be a real problem for this country and this continent.
You see, my conclusion is, and I've been thinking about this a lot, this whole, because I was looking at data from CIA website because they have an extensive data bank. And every time you look at places like Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, it's a younger population.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to Europe and West, it's an aging population and it's on a decline. And I can't think of anything else apart from thinking it's definitely got to do with us meddling in the whole gender issue. Maybe we should let it be and maybe follow Trump for once for once on this issue.
Careful what you wish for.
Not everything, but on this particular issue.
Be careful. Look, again, I'll let you surmise what you want to surmise. I don't think I've seen any evidence of that being the case. I think look, there is something also about culture, isn't there? And whether we become more individualistic as a society, those societies that are more about community, that see large families as the norm. I mean, my wife has 7 siblings. She's one of 8. So alhamdulillah, we're one of 8.
I mean, look, you are right. Culturally, we do believe in our family systems, and we do believe in growth.
But look, as I say, I don't really, and you kind of keep asking the question differently.
No, I'm not asking you a question. I'm concurring with you what you just said.
No, but I'm just saying there's probably some good empirical data and studies that are done, and you're right. I should maybe go away and read them as well. But I'm certain there'll be some good studies and tell us why that's the case. Mm-hmm. What the inescapable conclusion is if you've got
a lot of people do fear this whole cost of living. They tend to take matters into their own hand. And I do speak to a lot of people, brothers, sisters, men, women, and I said, look, let it be. You're not in charge of a human being. It's God that's in charge. Mm-hmm. So why are you making a God's decision? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Again, these are very basic examples, very basic talk. So let's move on. You're Nicola Sturgeon? Sturgeon. Did she pick you, or did you win again, through your own hard work and efforts?
No, she wasn't involved in. I take it you mean the leadership contest. No, she wasn't involved and made it very clear she's not going to back any candidate. Look, she and I were friends and are friends and go back many, many, many years. And I'm grateful for the advice and support that she's given over the years. But I think Nicola rightly decided to make sure she sat the election contest out. The election contest wasn't great, I think, is an understatement. I mean, it was, far too divisive. It got quite personal at times. It's not an election I would like to rerun. Again, I have to say that I would like to do things I would hope differently, and I suspect Kate Forbes, my main opponent at the time, who kind of launched a pretty serious personal attack on my character on TV in one debate. I think she would probably reflect that she would like to have done things differently as well. Probably would have given her a better chance in the contest too. So look, I think election contests by their nature are very divisive. As a political party, the question is, how do you heal afterwards? Now, I wasn't able, I'm afraid, to bring the party together afterwards adequately in the way that I would have liked. I'm very pleased that John, my successor, has managed to do that in a way that I wasn't able to do so. And I only ever wish the party success. I believe in the SNP. I believe in independence. I want the party to win a fifth term, and I want Scotland to eventually win its independence.
I mean, you did pick up you inherited some really serious stuff like cash scandal, police probe.
Not on me, I should say.
Not on you, of course. Not on you.
To be careful.
So it wasn't a level playing field for you. I mean, what you came into was a mess to begin with.
Look, I think that's probably right. But Kazi, I go back to the point I made to you a few questions ago, which is I can either sit here and I can reflect over how difficult the cards were that I was dealt. Well, there was a police investigation, my predecessor got arrested, there was this problem, that problem, this thing happened, that thing happened, in-laws were stuck in Gaza, I can blame all these problems, or I can reflect back on it with real gratitude and humility and say, alhamdulillah, I had the opportunity to be the first minister of my country, for shorter than I would have liked, admittedly, but I got to be the first minister of my country, and I got to also do that in a historic way as the first Muslim, first person of colour, youngest first minister in the history of Scottish devolution.
That's impressive,
well.
Youngest.
So look, but alhamdulillah, with the hope all of those things would allow other people to then say, well, if he can achieve it, then hopefully I can achieve it, because you can't be what you can't see. So you can either live your life in one way, regret, or you can live the other way and say, look, gratitude, and I try to practice as much gratitude as I can.
Would people of Scotland see you as a fixer or a failure?
I would hope that they would see me as somebody who dedicated his life to public service and that got some things right and got some things wrong. Nobody's record, I think, is a perfect one. But I hope the people of Scotland would look at me as somebody who was sincere in his intention. So when I announced that I was going to resign as First Minister, I did a TV interview with a journalist afterwards, a couple of days afterwards. And he said to me, Humza, I've been talking to the opposition and I've been talking to members of the public, but even your opposition say to me he was a really nice guy and maybe he was too nice for politics. And I said to the reporter, look, if the biggest criticism of my opponents is that he's a nice guy, that's not the worst thing in the world to go out on. And I'm not saying that was the only challenge that my opposition had with me. They called me all sorts of things other than nice. But I think the point is you can let other people judge your record. That's totally fine. And the election, I would say if people thought I was a failure, I wouldn't have been elected 3 times. And by the way, I increased my majority the last time I was elected in 2021. But ultimately, you've got to be happy, confident with what you achieved yourself. And I always know that what I did, got it right, got it wrong, somewhere in between, that I always had not just the best of intentions, but I always worked in the dedicated service of the public.
MashaAllah. Was there a wish list when you became the First Minister? Okay, this is what I'm going to do, and this is the ideal situation. And, I'm sure we all write our goals down and, we manifest them.
Oh, yeah. There was definitely. And look, number one on that list was to reduce child poverty.
Okay.
Because child poverty is too high in Scotland, still is too high, and was too high. We've made some inroads into that, and some of the powers are absolutely in our hands. Some of them, I'm afraid, are still in the hands of the Westminster government, but some of them are absolutely in our hands. And so the number one issue, I should say, is child poverty. Obviously, I want Scotland to become an independent country. That's
Number one.
Also top of the wish list. But look, I don't want Scotland to be independent for the sake of being independent. I want independence because I want to improve the life chances of children, etc., etc. So look, other than independence, which is an overarching cause of the party, as First Minister, I wanted to get straight on to affecting child poverty and decreasing child poverty as best I possibly can. And yeah, definitely made some inroads into that. Didn't have long enough, I think, to probably do what I wanted to do. I'm pleased John's continued that. And I think he's making a really good job of it.
Anything else on your wish list that was there that you couldn't get to because time was too short?
Look, lots. I only really had one budget.
Exactly.
And that was very difficult because that budget, we was getting really constrained by the UK government. We didn't have additional money. In fact, if anything, we had massive black hole in the budget that we had to cut and fill. And, my budget secretary had to stand in Parliament and announce many difficult cuts at the time. I would have liked to seen us make further progress around the NHS as well, in terms of waiting lists. And as Health Secretary and as First Minister, the progress wasn't as quick as I would have wanted it to be. And people, I think, were right to say that should be being done quicker. But I'm also very proud of what we did achieve and what we have achieved in the SNP. And as I say, we've managed to, in comparison to England and Wales, we've got a better story to tell in relation to child poverty. Still too many children in poverty, but better story to tell. We can look at the people of Scotland and say that from cradle, in fact, before cradle, if you think about the baby box, and all of the prenatal support that we give women and pregnant mothers, cradle to grave, we're able to provide extensive support and a safety net for people, whether that's the baby box, whether that's free primary school meals, P1 to 5, whether it's free tuition at university, whether it's a social security system, whether it's winter fuel payments that we're bringing back, which the Labour Party obviously cut and then you turned on. Kind of cradle to grave, we're providing support to people in a way that they're not getting in other parts of the United Kingdom. So look, I'm proud of a lot of what the SNP has achieved. It's why I think we keep getting re-elected, and why, if you look at most polls, we're still leading support from compared to other political parties, including Labour.
You managed to annoy the environmentalists as well, somehow.
Not all of them. I mean, I managed to piss off the Greens, I think it's fair to say, as a party. But no, I think, look, I still meet with climate change organisations regularly. I speak out. I most recently spoke out about Rosebank oil and gas field, which is a huge oil and gas development in the North Sea in Scotland, and spoke about why I think that can't go ahead, not just for environmental reasons, but actually one of the energy companies that has a stake there has a parent company that does work in Israeli settlements. Which I think Israeli settlements should not be profiting from Scotland's natural resources.
What will destroy us sooner? Environmental challenges or nuclear war?
Oh my goodness! What
and
a question.
where should we focus our energy?
So I don't think it's an either or. I would hope that the threat of nuclear war, because of mutually assured destruction, would not happen. But I honestly could not say that somebody is not going to press the button again in my lifetime, because we have maniacs, some cases genocidal maniacs like Benjamin Netanyahu, who've got access to nuclear weapons. But at the same time, as I say, with that whole theory of mutually assured destruction, one would hope that wouldn't happen, but I'm afraid that there's no guarantee of that, and many academics who can speak better to this issue would tell you otherwise. On the climate change, we are so far behind as a planet where we need to be. Look, if I take this just as a faith-based issue, and not for everybody it is, we're told in our faith that we're vicegerents in this earth, that we're meant to protect this earth and this environment. And I'm not having a go at you, so please don't take it this way. But, we're also a community that will fly in private jets. We'll be a community that will, I think a lot of our country's not committing enough in terms of diversifying away from oil and gas, for example, which we know is a huge emitter. And while it may be a source of revenue, extreme revenue, we've got to think, well, at what cost to our planet? And look, I made those challenges when I was at COP in Dubai, COP28, as it was then. So the planet is burning, and it will be our children and grandchildren that pay the price for it.
Again, I'm going to give you an example of Bangladesh. We've been recycling for ages, as far as I remember. I mean, I was born in 86, and, what I've seen was these guys would come around with sweets and, things, and you'd get the kids to go and collect all the plastics and all the metals, and then once you give the metal and the plastics to the guy, and he will give you some sweets. It was amazing. Really? I was thinking wow, we've been doing this for ages, and here, we're still trying to do play catch up.
And the sweets they gave you, were they in plastic wrappers?
Sorry?
The sweets they gave you, were they in plastic wrappers?
No, it was literally from a tray. Really? Here you go, here's a scoop.
So I think there's the thing about Bangladesh, and a country that's very close to my heart, and that I love the people of that nation. You've got, obviously, there's been through political turmoil in Bangladesh. The person interim in charge, Mohammed Yunus, somebody I've met over the years and got great admiration for. I would say for countries that are, as we often term it, and I'm not sure this term is very fair, but countries in the global south, they're not the ones that contributed to the problem. So Bangladesh isn't contributing to the problem. Malawi isn't contributing to the problem. Rwanda is not contributing to the problem. I'm afraid, but they are the ones that are suffering the effects of climate change. That's why I believe in climate justice, why I believe in loss and damage, which says, look, those countries that benefited from industrialisation, using coal, like the United Kingdom, Scotland included, we should pay more to help to solve the problem, because it's the global south that are the ones like Bangladesh, as I say, like Malawi, like Rwanda, like Zambia, many other countries, they're the ones that suffer the most because of the impacts, but they didn't cause it.
Interesting point, that is. No, I didn't think of it like this.
No.
Interesting. So, do you have a mentor? Or did you have a panel of mentors that you would go to for advice before you were really making decisions or thinking of ideas? Because in business, we sound, our ideas with other friends and people that we trust.
The honest answer is not enough. So not in a structured way. There's always people that I've admired, looked up to. I mentioned Saida Warsi and Sadiq Khan. These people are different political parties to me, but I've always admired them. They've always been on the other end of a phone if I wanted to speak to them, but I probably didn't use them in that sense enough. I think also one of the mistakes politicians can make, and I definitely made it, was you can surround yourself by people in the political bubble too much and believe.
The yes people or...
Not even yes people. Sometimes they'll challenge you, but they only think through the prism of the political system. Mm-hmm. Every calculation's a political calculation. And of course, we don't live just purely in a political world. We live in a world of humans, right? They've got diverse interests and act differently to the way that politicians act, and not everybody makes a political calculation. And so you can immerse yourself in the political bubble. That's a danger for any politician. And advice I would have to any politician, based on mistakes that I've made, is don't immerse yourself in that political bubble. So definitely have people that you take advice from. And look, I have family and friends, but interestingly, my close group of friends, I've got a really close group of friends, known them for 30, some of them more than 30 years actually, most of my life. And the interesting thing with those friends is I very rarely talk politics because it's the one time I'm not Humza Yousaf, the former First Minister. I'm just Humza, right? I'm the guy that went to their house when they were, played computer games when we were younger, played football, now play badminton because we're getting a bit older and can't quite keep up at football. We're just pals. And I should have actually lent more on them during the time, not just I was First Minister, but also the other cabinet positions and ministerial positions I had. So if I was giving advice to anybody entering politics, actually it's the very question you ask, is make sure that you do have people that you can lean on, sound out, that can keep you grounded as you elevate through the political ranks.
Did you find yourself isolated in your own kind of, when you went home and like, okay, what do I do? What's happening? What's going to be my next move? Because ultimately it is about strategies and it is about planning, planning what you want and I suppose coming up with a plan on how you're going to get it done.
Yeah, it definitely plays obviously a significant part. But I think also what it's about is some things are in your control and some things are not in your control. I mentioned already, decisions that are made by Keir Starmer will affect lots of Labour politicians. So it's not necessarily in their control. Now you could argue they could leave the Labour Party and that's fine. That's a fair thing to say. But generally speaking, what Keir Starmer does, they're going to have very little influence. And so that's just one example of things that are not in you have pretty little control, let alone geopolitics. I had no control over the fact that my in-laws were going to end up being trapped in Gaza for 4 weeks. No idea that was going to come and hit us. And we're going to have to deal with all the ramifications of that while trying to still lead a country. So some things are just not in your control, and you've got to accept that and be humble in that respect. In terms of isolation, I suppose this would be advice that I would give again to any kind of budding politician, is you can very quickly as a politician become completely burnt out because you become isolated inwardly. You don't, even if you're present with your family, you're not really present. Your mind is going on to the next set of statistics that are coming out tomorrow, or First Minister's questions.
Must be hard. It must be very difficult when everything is not in the... I mean, if you're the ruler of Dubai, then you kind of have a control over what's going to happen and what's not going to happen. But when it's a democratic system, like anyone can say anything.
Yeah, but look, I suspect even the ruler of Dubai has his sleepless nights, worrying about things, and it's true, of course, of most leaders, that they will, but I think it is important. That's why it's important to, one, have a good team around you so you can delegate properly, but also keep yourself grounded, and take care of your mental health. I wish I should have done this actually. During the time I was First Minister, I should have also continued to see my counsellor, my therapist.
That bad?
Yeah, no, not that.
Like where you have to actually.
No, I think you're looking at it the wrong way.
I mean, in a good way, that bad.
But what I mean by that is, look, I went to therapy when I was Transport Minister. Right, things had got really bad in my life. I was going through a divorce. Politically, the pressure was on me. A couple of other things happened. And I hit crisis point. Real bad breakdown. Didn't talk to anybody, didn't talk to my family about it. Definitely didn't talk to Nicola Sturgeon, who was my kind of boss at the time. Didn't talk to anybody about it. Really horrible breakdown. And it was a friend who actually was a psychiatrist, so a medical doctor. He said to me, look, I'm not going to write you a prescription because, that's not what you need. You need to talk to somebody. And I've got the person you need to talk to. And they gave me a detail of a therapist. And so I spoke to that therapist, and she was a wonderful support during that time. But I always said to myself, I'm not going to leave it to crisis point to have to then go back to a therapist. And that's what I would say to any leader. And by the way, this is not just politics, leader more generally. People are in high pressure environments in business, in public service, public sector, is don't let it get to crisis point. Make sure that you're always taking care of your mental health so you don't become isolated, you don't become withdrawn and ultimately have that breakdown. Don't wait for that crisis moment. It's always, as much as you take care of your physical health, right, and you do that regularly, I'm beginning to do that with a bit more regularity. What are we doing to make sure that we're taking care of our mental health as well?
I think a good run helped me with my mental health because it just makes me more solutions driven, solves my problems, and it's a good feel. Good. When you have that 5K run. Yeah.
Running helps, gym helps. For me, badminton gets the frustration out as well when I'm playing. So whatever it is for people, it might be reading, it might be writing in a journal, but you definitely got to take care of your mental health.
Talk to him about your in-laws being stuck in Gaza. How did that happen?
So I suppose to give some context, my wife, although born in Dundee, her father's Palestinian from Gaza.
And she's also into politics, by the way, your wife.
Yeah, she's elected as a local councillor, but she'd been involved in the SNP. It's kind of sad to say that's the way we met, right enough, to the SNP. But she is a local councillor. Her family comes from a place called Deir Bala, which people follow what's happening in Gaza. They'll have heard of Deir Bala in the centre of Gaza, really towards the south. And her grandmother lived there along with her brother and her stepmom and lots of other family members. So the father wanted to go back. His mother at that time was 93, I think, or 92 maybe. So she was elderly. She had a really bad bout of COVID, actually. They thought they were going to lose her. So he went to go see her to make sure she was, well, no, he thought it might be the last time. She actually recovered from that bout, but she was still pretty frail. So he wanted to go see her. Went with his wife, my mother-in-law. And yeah, on the Saturday morning of 7th of October 2023, I'll never forget. You know, my wife's phone is both phones charged on the table beside my side of the bed, and her phone was just flashing, kind of constant message, like one after the other. And I thought, what's kind of going on? I can't remember what time in the morning it was. I said to her, look, Nads, you've got tons of messages from your mum. You want to just check what's going on? And Mum was sending videos and videos and videos of rockets that were firing, actually from this point from Hamas out to Israel. And she said, the news channel's been blocked, like we can't see what's going on, what's happening. So we obviously put on Al Jazeera, and, you know, put on the news, and we see the atrocity of the 7th of October. And it was an atrocity, there's no two ways about it. What had happened, and of course in our minds we knew what the retaliation would be. I have to say, none of us thought it could possibly be as bad as what we're witnessing, but we thought it's going to be bloody awful. And I'm First Minister at the time, as you rightly reflect on. And it's, you know, a very difficult set of conversations I've got to have with my wife, as well as my mother-in-law and father-in-law. Obviously, I want to try to get them out, but the border's already been sealed and closed, and that, we know that's going to be difficult. I'm obviously going to condemn the attack that happened the 7th of October, because who wouldn't? You know, innocent people got killed, children got kidnapped. That's just not acceptable and justifiable in any way, shape or form. But in criticising that October and condemning that October the 7th attack, I had to be honest with my wife and say, look, Hamas are going to know where your parents are. They're in Gaza. We're going to have to accept that comes with some risk, and they might retaliate to that statement. They didn't, obviously, eventually. And then we had those 4 weeks of absolute hell, where my wife was glued to the television, watching the 24/7 coverage, recognising her family neighbourhood. She used to go back to Gaza, my wife, regularly before the blockade. Inconsolable with grief that she'd never see her mum or dad again. And tried to explain to my daughter, who was 4 at the time, 2 daughters, 4 at the time and 14 at the time, that, you know, the 14-year-old had more understanding of what was going on. So she really understood that her granny could die and her grandfather could die. To my 4-year-old, just trying to explain, look, Granny's scared of the thunder. You know, it's just thunder. She's scared of thunder. And, you know, my daughter would not understand my mum. Her mum was just in floods of tears every day, every hour of the day. And yeah, I had to try to obviously navigate the politics and the geopolitics of that situation. Had to keep running the country, because there's more than just the Israel-Gaza issue. There's lots of other things going on with the health service, justice system, transport system, etc., etc. And also all the politics internally. I mean, I had to make my first speech at party conference as leader, which is a huge moment for any political leader. Your first conference speech in front of your delegates, you know, your party faithful. And at the same time, making sure the Muslim and Jewish community didn't rupture in Scotland, because they traditionally had a very good relationship, but the tensions were absolutely there. And yeah, I would easily say, look, those 4 weeks from our kind of political, professional, and even personal perspective were some of the most difficult 4 weeks of our lives.
So eventually, how did they manage to get out?
So first of all, the UK government weren't of much help. The Foreign Secretary, let alone the Prime Minister, but the Foreign Secretary had to be publicly shamed into phoning me, actually. He didn't call me to try to reassure me about what was going on. You know, first as First Minister in terms of the situation, but then obviously he wanted to give me an update on, you know about your parents and so on and so forth. But it was only when the media harangued him into saying, you know, why have you not spoken to the First Minister of Scotland about this issue, given he's got, you know, in-laws trapped there. The UK government were of little help, but eventually, and that's not to discredit civil service. I think the FCDO were doing a good job, but Rishi Sunak, James Cleverly, not so much. They eventually got out because some British nationals, you know, there was a number of British nationals that were given permission to leave. You know, that list had to be agreed between the British, the Israelis, I think the Egyptians as well. and they were just part of that cohort. There was no kind of special treatment for them. They were, as I say, part of a cohort. I can't remember how many were on that list of British citizens that were allowed out at that time. We also managed later on, not at that time, many months later, to get some of my wife's family out of Gaza, including her grandmother, who's now 94, 95, out of Gaza. And they're mainly in Istanbul, but there's still some family that are there, and I don't need to tell you how horrendous the situation is.
For those who don't speak up for Palestinians, are they somehow complicit, or are they to be held responsible for not speaking out, talking of politicians specifically?
I don't just say this is about politicians. I think everybody has a responsibility to speak out against injustice. I think silence is complicity. Now, there's absolute complicity, and that complicity exists first and foremost with the Israelis. But I think the UK government is complicit because we're selling arms to Israel, to a man who's wanted for war crimes by the International Criminal Court. And then there's maybe more indirect complicity in that, saying, look, none of us can look away. We can't turn away from the scenes of death, destruction and starvation in front of our eyes. We live in a day and age where the genocide is being live streamed on your mobile phone. I'm afraid you can see the corpses of young children burned and charred, shot, bruised, battered, dismembered. You can't escape it. So you can't say you didn't know what was happening and the scale of the cruelty that was happening.
Some non-Muslims still don't know.
I think they probably
Is that genuine?
I think people might choose not to look. And look, I'm not saying that everybody should look at the graphic scenes, because that's hard to look at for anybody, especially if you're a parent. But that's hard to look at. But most people, I think, would have an idea that there is a scale of devastation and death in Gaza, and most people would conclude that it's unjustifiable. So you have a responsibility, I think, as a human being. Don't care what your religion is, faith is, colour is, nationality is. As a human being, when other human beings are suffering such cruelty and in front of our eyes, then you have an absolute responsibility to speak out. And we shouldn't just limit this to Gaza. What's happening in Gaza is awful. I would say, look, we should be making sure we speak out about cruelty that's happening anywhere in the world. And I mentioned Sudan, it's not getting enough airtime. In fairness, I'm not even speaking enough about it. I've done the odd posts and videos about it. You know, we've got to make sure we're vocal about terrible cruelty we see wherever we see it.
Do you think Israel or the criminals, did they miscalculate the whole idea of TikTok and Instagram and the live feeds? Because normally they would control the narrative through the media outlets. But TikTok has come along quite recently. Perhaps it became more popular after the lockdown or during the lockdown. Do you think they miscalculated in terms of the narrative? Because obviously it feels like they are losing that narrative. They're not winning in terms of controlling the narrative.
That's a really interesting observation. By the way, I think the tide has probably only turned in the last few weeks, or maybe even last month. So we saw quite a strong statement. It was only words, of course, but statement from David Lammy, Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, Mark Carney. So we saw some kind of stronger language. Not really any meaningful action, kind of sanctions against a few people, but not going to make a difference. But stronger language. So the tide maybe turned in terms of rhetoric. Maybe a few weeks ago or a month ago. I think the Israeli government under Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli government have a very strong propaganda unit. I think they're very good at pumping out as much propaganda as possible. And astonishingly, Benjamin Netanyahu has an incredible ability to portray himself as a victim. So he strikes Iran strikes back, and then he claims to be a victim. It's an astonishing attempt to tell us not to believe the evidence of our own eyes. But I think people are, I think your observation is a very good one. I think with the extensive access to social media, I think more and more people probably are uncovering the reality, but the opposite can also happen, that people can be pumped so much misinformation and disinformation that they don't know what's true and what's not.
You know, that came, I found that quite shocking as well, or quite interesting, because how the narrative, Western media narrative, at least in Europe, is changing towards Palestine and Gaza? Is it because now they are moving on to bigger things like Iran? Is it like a kind of way to wrap things up in Gaza and try and, get the mindset ready? Like, we need to be war ready, we need to be this, and we need to... It's like even Piers Morgan, his tones have changed. I just find it very difficult to believe the media and the narratives that are coming from politicians, because...
No, you're not the only one, yeah. I think you're right to be understandably
So suddenly,
skeptical.
all of a sudden, oh yeah, we need to do this, we need to do that, but... As you said, there's no substance. It's all talk.
And also just far too late, right? I mean, if David Lammy and Keir Starmer had made statements against Israel's actions a year ago, how many thousands of lives might have been saved, right? So far too little and far too late is the correct analysis. Look, the motivations behind it, why they're doing it. Again, we could speak in a whole podcast. The point is this: people in Gaza are still being starved.
Yeah.
People in Gaza, including innocent men, women and children, are still being killed. Israel is breaking international law with impunity. Netanyahu is wanted for war crimes and crimes against humanity. And European and Western governments in particular are providing shielding, cover, impunity, and arms and funding to allow him to continue his atrocities. What that does is says that the blood of Palestinians, the blood of Muslims, the blood of Arabs is far cheaper than the blood of Europeans, because we can see the difference in approach in Ukraine when it comes to Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. And by the way, I support giving Ukrainians refuge and supporting the people of Ukraine. But look at the difference of Western governments' response to Ukraine versus their response to children dying in Gaza at a much bigger scale, vast scale than we're seeing in Ukraine. And that is a hypocrisy that is going to live in the minds of many people for many, many generations to come.
Elon Musk.
My best friend.
Do you indirectly actually like him deep down?
No, not deep down or not on the surface. I don't actually. No, I don't. Because, look, it's often been said about money, and you can speak about this more than I could, but people that when they become wealthy, does it change a person? And people will often say, well, actually, it probably just amplifies who they really were. So if they were a kind person, they'll be even more kind. If they're, a nasty person, they'll be even more nasty, and they'll use their money in that way. I think my suspicion is that Elon Musk has always been supportive of white supremacy. And because he's now got almost infinite amount of money, that simply is amplified. And he's undoubtedly a supporter of white supremacy. He supports openly white supremacists, and those in the far right, be they in the United States, be they in the United Kingdom, be they in the European continent. And he's used his wealth to buy huge amounts of influence, including unfettered access to the President of the United States. He tries to subvert...
Not anymore, right?
Well, I think he probably still has significant access, even though, he's pissed Trump off through various kind of tweets. But he probably, I suspect, can be still very influential in the White House, and they'll probably make up in some way, shape or form, because they probably both need each other. He supports far-right movements across Europe, supports people like Tommy Robinson. Remember, Tommy Robinson is somebody who called Islam a violent and fascist ideology. So he's, I think, one of the most dangerous men in the world, if not the most dangerous man in the world, because he's unaccountable, he's unelected, and he uses his vast billions to support hatred and the spreading of hatred right across the world.
He is smart though, right?
Well, look, I don't doubt he's smart, but there can often be a fine line between genius and being mad and being genius. But it's not just about the fact he's smart. There's no doubt he's smart. And by the way, he's made some considerable achievements over the course of his career. I don't doubt that. The question isn't his IQ. The question is he using his wealth in a way that is to the betterment of humanity and society, or actually is he determined to create divisions, foment hatred, and what's the ideology that's driving the man.
Obviously, you've had exchanges with him.
A few.
Would you give him dawah? Invite him to Islam?
Yeah,
Maybe he's never thought of it. Maybe he's explored all the other religions apart from Islam.
I'll leave that to people that are more scholarly than I am. I think every sinner can have redemption. I think it's fair to say. I think with Elon Musk, I don't know what drives. I don't know what his views are on God or faith, and some people.
At one point on his Twitter handle or location said it was hell.
No, really, okay. So maybe.
Okay, so
I think the thing with Elon Musk is he is telling us who he is, right? So I think it was a quote from Maya Angelou, the author, who said, "When people show you who they are, believe them." This is a man who quite literally does Nazi salutes on television. So he's telling us who he is. Really, we should do something to try to make sure that we're listening, believing the evidence of our own eyes, and trying to do something about it.
don't buy Teslas.
I I said I would never buy a Tesla because why would I want to give money to Elon Musk so he can keep perpetuating hate? And that's probably one of the reasons why he left the White House role. I mean, Tesla.
He didn't get what he wanted, maybe.
Well, not like that. Tesla shares plummeted through the floor. In the first quarter of President Trump's first term, I think, or since his election win, just completely fell. This Tesla stock price fell through the floor. So when I say he's unaccountable, I suppose the very small group of people he's accountable to are shareholders, and no doubt they told him your political meddling is coming at great cost to us, and we're not prepared to accept that much longer.
Do you think Donald Trump, there is a method to his madness?
I'm yet to see evidence of that. Is the diplomatic answer. He is somebody who always talks about doing a deal. Again, we saw some evidence of that the very early on with the ceasefire in Gaza, but that was fragile and didn't last. He's now given Iran 2 weeks, he says. We'll see if that holds true. And is that because he wants to make the deal? So, in another sense, he seems very uncomplicated because I think most people think and believe that he's driven by not just deals, but accumulating as much as he possibly can personally for himself and maybe even his family. So if there is method in the madness, one, I'm not sure I see evidence of it, but secondly, I'm not sure that method is one that is conducive to the greater public good. Okay.
Keir Starmer. He's very it seems like he's very smooth, very polished, and he rarely gives an answer to journalists. What are your thoughts?
So politicians, and myself included, sometimes we can suffer from that problem.
You guys are very good at avoiding and dodging questions.
Yeah. So look, it's a fair criticism of all of us, I think. I think with Keir, what people are struggling to understand is what's the vision.
What do you want? Where do you stand? Where do you want to go?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's it in a nutshell. I mean, I probably don't really have much to add to that because nobody really knows what drives them. So you might not agree with certain conservative leaders, but you kind of understand what drives them. I never agreed with a conservative probably in my life, right, about most issues. But you kind of know what drives them. Reform. Don't like them, don't agree with them. I know what drives them. Don't like migrants, don't like Muslims very much, and so on and so forth. So I know what drives them. Keir Starmer, I don't know what drives the man. So I don't know what it is. What does he get out of bed for? What is it that excites him? What's his ideology? And it looks like it kind of blows with the wind, maybe based on opinion polls or focus groups that he conducts. And I think that's the problem. I mean, I've never seen a government come in with such a majority and lose so much support so quickly. And I think on the international stage, he's obviously done what he can in terms of Ukraine, but I think Gaza, he's shown such poor leadership. I'm really disappointed. And I'll say this about Keir Starmer. He was one of the first people to give me a call when my in-laws were stuck in Gaza. And I appreciated that on a personal level. And I did try to plead with him back then. He was leader of the opposition. Tried to plead with him back then to say, you've got to take a much firmer stance that you're taking because the retaliation is going to be brutal. That was before, it was only a few weeks in. post October the 7th. And I'm sorry that didn't have the impact, because it clearly fell on deaf ears. So I don't know what drives Keir Starmer, but I'm not surprised that he has gone to become one of the most unpopular leaders this country has probably seen in many, many years. And I think it will continue. His star will continue to wane.
Humza Yousaf, thank you so much for being with us. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you and learning more about you. And I hope our viewers and audience would appreciate this episode, because I don't think you've been on a podcast after you've left offices. I mean, we couldn't get into the whole aspect of why you've left and what happened and all of that. Maybe another time, inshallah. But 1 hour, 34 minutes.
I hope you enjoy it, and I hope your viewers enjoy it too.
Thank you very much. Jazakallah khairan.
Take care. Assalamu.
And that's it for today on Side by Side. I hope you have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with our guest, Mr. Humza Yousaf, all the way from Scotland, the first ever Muslim former First Minister of Scotland. If you have enjoyed any of our contents on today's episode, please do share this episode around with friends and family, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button on the platform you are tuned into, because it is your subscription that motivates me and the team here at Side by Side to continue episode after episode. And with that said, let's reunite on our next episode. Assalamu alaikum.